when they say they're stressed, but what they mean is that they perceive a hostile world. So hostile world is a psychological theory that's quite old, and it really explains a lot of the reason why some of us are so stressed and living in the same circumstances as other people who are not stressed. It's like, okay, if we put 50 people in the same situation and 30 of them are not stressed and 20 of them are super stressed, then it must be an internal mechanism that's creating the stress, right? And that's what I mean by making this series on stress. So if you're interested in this topic, make sure to follow, because I have a whole series on why people use this term that I'm stressed. And they use it as a blanket statement to explain all kinds of issues that are happening internally. The problem with using this blanket statement is that I'm stressed is a super ambiguous term, super ambiguous phrase that doesn't actually allow us to address the root cause. So that's why we're digging into the root causes of why people feel stressed, so that we can actually fix them and then make people feel better. So when sometimes people say that they're stressed, like I'm stressed, what they actually mean is I perceive a hostile environment. And so I believe it was Einstein that said people either can choose to live in a friendly world or a hostile world. I'm butchering the quote, but essentially that's the gist of it. And what happens is that some of us have this bias in our minds where we just take all of the negative things that happen, all of the dangers, all of the risks, all of the bad things that could happen, and that's what filters into our mind. And then we perceive the world as this hostile place. We think like the world is dangerous. And how do we know that the world isn't actually as dangerous as you think? Is because you will see other people in the same scenario as you, in the same world as you, perceiving it more safe. And so if you're one of those people that always kind of is seeing the risk and the people around you don't necessarily see it, you might be one of the people that perceives a hostile world. And the problem with perceiving a hostile world is that you're going to have trade-offs. And so if you perceive the world as hostile in your mind and your body are going to run a stress reaction. And with a stress reaction, we're going to have short-term benefits and long-term detriments. Because if you live in a hostile world, the mind and the body have decided, I'm going to optimize for the short term to make sure this person survives. Makes perfect sense. The problem is we all know that stress is related to chronic disease. And so that's why it's related to chronic disease, because the body decides to run all of these mechanisms that help you in the short term. Like it runs adrenaline, it runs cortisol, it kind of gets you into that sympathetic response, that fight or flight, because it thinks that like horrible things are going to happen, we need to go. And the problem with this is that over time that deteriorates your body. But the mind and the body are like, this is great. We're going to keep doing this because it's keeping this person alive. Like that's the theory behind running this like stress protocol. Like the mind and the body aren't actually trying to give you chronic disease. They're trying to keep you alive because they think you live in a hostile world, which actually in your mind you do, because you keep perceiving all of these like super negative things. You keep catastrophizing. So catastrophizing is a big one, where you like have all of these scenarios of all the worst things that could happen running through your mind, running, looping, and you keep worrying about horrible things that might happen. And to your mind, like it can't really differentiate too much about like what you're thinking and what is actually happening. Like that still has a neurobiological mechanism that it releases from those scenarios. And so you live in a hostile world in your mind, and then therefore you have massive stress reactions. And people think like, oh, I need to start a relaxation, meditation routine, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, even if you meditate like 20 minutes a day, even if you meditate 40 minutes a day, that doesn't necessarily fix the root cause, which is that you live in a hostile world in your mind. And the root cause is your perception filter. And that's what you need to fix. You need to learn how to perceive the world in a more neutral way. You need to balance out the positive and negative perceptions and see the world as more objective, because most of us don't actually live in such a hostile environment as the mind perceives it to be so. And so if you can perceive a safer environment, then your mind will then and body will follow and allow you to feel safer and not have to live in that stress state. So hopefully this explanation made a ton of sense. If you are now sitting here like thinking, well, how do I do that? Well, obviously it takes a lot of repetition. So you made it to this certain age that you are now with this type of thinking. And so you repeated certain thoughts and certain thought patterns over and over and over again to create these schemas you have in your mind, which is kind of like how you think about the world and how you filter the world. And so if you want to undo that, it does take some time. It takes process. And so if you're interested in working on that, if you're interested in changing the way you think in order to have better outcomes, both physically, mentally, and in your life, then I encourage you to book an intro session. This is something that we can work on, and we can definitely change the way that your mind operates so that you can not live in a hostile world. You can live in a world full of opportunity, and then you can have the effects of that type of mindset, the positive effects of that type of mindset.